top of what you did to me. Guards!
Ma'am, sit down. You can't talk to her like that. This is a courtroom, not your living room. The words barely landed before the cup flew. 1 second, the black judge was delivering a ruling with calm authority. The next, hot coffee splashed across her robe, steaming in front of a stunned crowd that didn't know whether to gasp, run, or pray. The attacker stood frozen, shocked that her rage had crossed a line she thought didn't apply to her. But power doesn't protect you when cameras, witnesses, and justice collide. This is the story of a woman who tried to humiliate a judge, ended up humiliating herself. Welcome, story lovers. Where are you watching from? Hit the like button and drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. Judge Amara Lewis had learned to walk into a courtroom the way some people walk into a storm steady. Head high, knowing the weather would not change for her comfort. At 42, she was one of the youngest circuit judges in the county, and the first black woman to hold the position in that courthouse's long, complicated history. Every morning began the same. A quiet drive past sleepy storefronts, a warm travel mug in her cough holder, and a brief pause in the parking lot to breathe before stepping into a building that still felt like it was deciding whether it truly wanted her inside. Her chambers were modest, but intentional. Family photos on one wall, law books lined like sentries on another. A small plant near the window that she somehow kept alive despite 12-hour days. She wasn't naive about what she represented. She knew her robe could look like a target to some and a promise to others. She also knew that fairness wasn't a slogan, it was a practice, repeated patiently in a place where patience was rarely offered to her. Amara's reputation had grown over the years, calm under pressure, thorough in her rulings, and unwavering toward those who tried to bend the law to their privilege. She had seen every kind of defendant and every kind of victim. She had watched jurors struggle with bias they didn't want to admit. She had sat through whispered comments in hallways that were meant to be quiet but never quite were. Still, she showed up. Not because she wanted to prove anything anymore, but because someone had to embody what justice could look like when the room didn't expect it. That Tuesday felt routine. The docket was packed with short hearings and one case that drew unusual attention. Civil dispute involving a wealthy local family known for throwing its influence around like a shadow. Amara skimmed the file early, noting the aggressive motions, the entitled tone in the filings, the way the other side was treated like an inconvenience rather than a human being. By the time she adjusted her robe and stepped toward the bench, the air in the courtroom already felt tight, like a wire pulled too far. Amara didn't know exactly what was coming, but she knew that when power feels threatened, it often arrives loud, careless, and sure, it won't be questioned. The courtroom filled faster than usual that morning, the kind of crowd that came not out of civic duty but curiosity. Amara noticed the subtle shift the moment she took her seat. People were leaning forward, whispering before the clerk even finished calling the case. The dispute on the docket wasn't criminal, but it carried a weight that made it feel like something larger. A black-owned construction company had sued for breach of contract after completing months of work on a luxury development. The opposing party was the Wickham family old money, its polished reputations, and a quiet influence that had shaped everything from local politics to high school booster clubs. They were used to winning before the first word was spoken. Amara had reviewed the filings carefully. The black-owned company had documentation, receipts, schedules, and signed approvals. Yet the Whitcombs' lawyers filed motion after motion, not disputing the work so much as questioning the credibility of the people who did it. The language was careful enough to be legal. Still, the meaning was familiar. Doubt them, delay them, drain them until they quit. Amara had seen that tactic in too many forms to ignore it. Now, when the lead plaintiff walked to the front, a middle-aged black man in a plain suit that looked like it had been worn to church funerals and graduations, Amara watched him steady his hands. His company had survived recessions, endless permit fights, and the kind of friendly advice that always seemed to mean know your place. The Whitcombs had been late with payments for months, sending assistance instead of answers. then suddenly accusing him of poor workmanship once the final bill arrived. He wasn't just fighting for money. He was fighting for the dignity of labor that was consistently praised until it demanded respect. Across the aisle, the Whitcomb matriarch sat upright like a statue carved from outrage. She was in her late 50s, wrapped in designer cream and pearls that caught the light every time she shifted. Her face carried a tight, rehearsed confidence, the kind that came from decades of walking through spaces that bent to her will. She didn't look at the plaintiff. She looked past him, as if the air itself was more worthy of acknowledgement. She sipped from a cardboard coffee cup she'd brought in despite the posted rules. It was a small act of defiance, and she wore it like a badge. Amara began the hearing with the usual precision. She let each side present their arguments, moving through the motions without emotion, only fact. The plaintiff's attorney laid out the timeline and evidence in a clear, hard-to-break line. The Whitcomb's lawyer responded with theatrics disguised as legal reasoning, hinting at unreliability, lack of professionalism, and concerns about standards. There was no clear proof behind those claims. Just the expectation that everyone in the room would nod along because that's what they had always done. As the minutes passed, Mara watched the entitled rhythm form. The Whitcomb side spoke louder, slower, and with the confidence of people certain that the courtroom was another extension of their living room. When Amara asked pointed questions, they answered in circles. When she pushed for specifics, they pivoted to tone and character. The plaintiff stayed quiet unless addressed, but his eyes flickered with every subtle insult that dressed itself up as procedure. Then the temperature changed. The Whitcomb matriarch began to react not only to the case, but to the judge herself. At first, it was subtle, tight smiles, exaggerated sighs, the kind of body language meant to broadcast disapproval without saying a word. Then it sharpened. Each time Amara ruled a motion irrelevant or asked for evidence instead of assumptions. The woman's composure cracked a little more. Her posture leaned forward like she was itching to cross an invisible line. Her mouth twisted each time the black plaintiff was spoken to with respect. It wasn't about the contract anymore. It was about the fact that someone she didn't believe deserved authority was exercising it over her. Amara felt the shift. She had lived long enough in her skin to recognize when anger wasn't just anger. It was entitlement colliding with a boundary it never expected to meet. The courtroom grew quieter as the spectators sensed something combustible in the air. Even the bailiff's stance changed, weight balanced, eyes scanning. Amara stayed steady. She issued a ruling on the following motion, firm and legally airtight. She cited the records, the signed approvals, and the missed payments. She made it clear that a delay without cause would not stand. In another time, another courthouse, that might have ended it. But in this room, where the old rules of unspoken hierarchy still lingered, the ruling landed like a slap to someone who had never been told no. The Whitcomb matriarch's face tightened into something raw and hot. Her fingers curled around the coffee cup. She rose slightly from her seat, no longer able to keep her fury contained. The air in the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, and Amara, sensing the surge but refusing to flinch, looked forward with the same calm she always carried, because she knew that the kind of person who believes the law should bow to them rarely stops at words when they feel cornered. The moment happened so fast that the courtroom barely understood it before it was already real. The Whitcomb matriarch stood fully now, her chair scraping a harsh line across the tiled floor. Her jaw trembled with the kind of anger that comes from a lifetime of never being checked. She stepped into the aisle, coffee still in hand, as if the rules of the room had dissolved for her alone. Amara looked up, composed, ready to call order, but the woman's fury had turned physical. She lunged forward in a sharp, careless arc, and the cup tilted. The hot coffee flew across the space like a weapon disguised as a tantrum. It splashed over Amara's robe, steaming against the dark fabric, droplets catching on her collar and hands. A collective gasp ripped through the gallery. The clerk froze mid-breath. The lawyers stood locked in disbelief. For a heartbeat, the courthouse seemed to stop moving. Amara didn't shout. She didn't even rise. Her face held the same calm it had carried through 1,000 slights, but her eyes hardened into something unmissable. The attack wasn't just on her body. It was on her authority, on the law itself. On the idea that a black woman could sit above someone who believed she never should. Before the entitled woman could form another motion, security surged. The bailiff and 2 deputies closed in with a practiced speed that left no room for escape. Her arm was pinned. The empty cup fell. Her pearls shook against her chest as she struggled. Not in fear, but in shock that consequences had arrived so quickly, less than 30 seconds after the splash. Cold metal cuffs locked around her wrists, and the courtroom watched her privilege collapse in real time. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. The deputies guided her away, not gently, not cruelly, just firmly. The way the law is supposed to move when it finally decides to move for everyone. The entitled woman's heels clicked in frantic, uneven beats as she was escorted out. Her face red with disbelief, her body still fighting a reality she'd never had to accept. The gallery stayed silent, not out of respect for her, but out of shock at what they had witnessed. A line had been crossed so publicly that no one could pretend it hadn't happened. Amara remained seated for a moment, shoulders squared, robe stained, hands steady. The heat of the coffee had stung, but it was the intention behind it that burned longer. She lifted her chin, asked for a brief recess, and walked calmly into chambers. There, away from the stairs, she let the quiet settle, not to break down, but to breathe through what the world always expected her to absorb. When the court reconvened, Amara returned in a fresh robe, her presence even stronger than before. The hearing continued, but the air had changed. The plaintiff, who had been shrinking under the weight of contempt all morning, now sat taller, reminded that dignity could survive even the loudest hatred. The Wickham's legal team looked hollow, finally forced to confront that their family name was not immunity. News of the incident spread quickly, because moments like that don't stay trapped inside courthouse walls. For some, it was a scandal. For others, it was a mirror held up to a truth they'd lived with for years that racism often hides behind. Refinement until it's challenged, and then it lashes out when it can't control the room. Amara's case would be remembered, but so would her restraint. And the question it left behind lingered heavier than any headline. How many times does Black excellence have to endure violence before respect stops being conditional?